Nathan Guy.
Mr Speaker, it's great to be able to make a contribution in the budget debate here this afternoon. Bill English stood up here on the 16th of May this year and delivered his fifth budget. It was fantastically well received by the electorate at large. Just look at the polling numbers for the national government over the last couple of weeks since Bill English stood in this House and rolled out his fifth budget. We need to acknowledge Bill English because he has weathered very tough economic times and steered a fantastic path for the small but powerful country of ours. We have come through the worst recession, one of the worst recessions in the history of this country, under the leadership of John Key and the Finance Minister Bill English. Now, this budget that was read out on the 16th of May means that we're going to get into surplus next year, 2014-15, which is fantastic when you think about all of the things that this government has had to weather. We are going to get back into surplus. We are forecast to stay on the growth path of around 3%. When you compare us with other countries around the world, this is fantastic. And of course, unemployment has dropped, the lowest it has been for about the last 3 years at 6.2%. When the opposition stand up here this afternoon and say there are no jobs, they are wrong. They are fundamentally wrong because this government backs business. They are the ones that are going to continue to grow the economy, and we back them to the hilt. What is also interesting is we are seeing the ACC reductions. Next year we're going to see a reduction of around $300 million, which is the size of a tax cut. Now, when we came into office, ACC was an absolute mess. Nick Smith and co have sorted ACC out with the Minister Judith Collins and turned ACC around so that now we can return those levies to hard-working families and businesses up and down the country. We're also putting more money, $5.1 billion over 4 years, into health and education. We heard from Minister Parada this afternoon about her focus and the government's focus on education. We've also heard in the last couple of weeks the real focus that we have on lifting the performance of health across New Zealand, and Minister Tony Rowell is doing a fantastic job in that space. There's more money into science. We're focusing on housing for the vulnerable people as well. This is a fantastic budget, and we need to acknowledge Bill English and the sterling work that he has done there. I want to spend some time this afternoon in my contribution talking about the Ministry for Primary Industry. They have the strategy of grow and protect. And what the opposition don't want to hear about is the growth part of the primary industry, because they don't care about growth. Andrew Little chips over in the back seat in the opposition. They don't want to hear about the prosperity of the Primary Growth Partnership. They don't care about businesses working in partnership with the government. We have invested in 13 projects in partnership with industry that is going to realise $7 billion prize by 2025, and that's going to be year on year. The government cares about business, and we back them. The opposition doesn't. Just today I've announced another funding round for the Primary Growth Partnership. And of course, what we're also going to do is grow the economy, and that's with free trade agreements as well, which is going to be a big part of our export double. Currently, primary industries is worth around $30 billion. We've set a target of $60 billion by 2025. Free trade agreements are going to be a part of that, as is also the Primary Growth Partnership. But of course, the problem that the Labor Party are going to have, if they are ever lucky enough to get into government, is that the Greens are against TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And Andrew Little nods there, and he knows that. He realises that that is a problem, because that is worth about $2 billion a year to us. So here we have the Labor sort of camp on the fence, unsure whether to support free trade agreements, and the far left part of a potential government heaven forbid if it ever happened in the future. The far lefties are against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So what I also want to focus on with the primary industries is also on biosecurity. That is my #1 priority, and it's something that I can't afford to take my eye off, and neither can my officials. And we have a world-class biosecurity system. And it's interesting that the opposition can't even read the budget, because they're out there saying that there's been a funding cut in biosecurity. And if they just looked below the top line in the budget, they would realise that there was $5 million in funding that was brought forward for the Joint Border Management System in 2011 and 12, and $1 million for the mergers with primary industries. And what they haven't realised, of course, there's no funding cut in biosecurity. Why would I allow that to happen when it is my #1 priority? So the challenge to the opposition is make sure they get their facts right. If they're going to stand up in this House or go out and talk to farmers who don't care and don't listen to them anyway, they should make sure that their facts are right. Opposition parties should clearly know and understand this is my #1 priority. That's why 30 new frontline biosecurity officers are being recruited now. 56 have been recruited in the last 6 months. I have such a focus on biosecurity that we're working with government industry agreements, and I acknowledge the stakeholders who are working through this so that we can be ready to respond to incursions and threats in the future. We're working closer than we ever have with our Australian counterparts on foot and mouth preparedness. Just tonight we've got a couple of officials flying up to the UK to be a part of their simulated exercise happening in the UK called Operation Walnut, a real focus on biosecurity. Can I also just take a comment and mention also meat exports into China, because there has been an issue with certification that MPI will learn from. Unfortunately it happened. It should have never happened, because as the regulator they issue about 12,000 documents a week. This is the bread and butter for them. There will be learnings that will come out of this. We don't want this to happen again. I need to acknowledge that we have reached a solution with the Chinese officials. I need to acknowledge them. I acknowledge also that the meat industry has played a part of this as well, and they've been very supportive to finding the resolution. We are going to host some Chinese officials down here to get a broader certification process underway, and the opposition, instead of harping on, they should be supporting this government. What I also want to focus on in this budget particular is the $80 million that's going into irrigation out of $400 million. It should be applauded. It should be applauded by the opposition. But of course they're confused, and their spokesperson for agriculture, he's unsure whether to support irrigation or not, because when Mr O'Connor visited Hawke's Bay with Shane Jones, they both said, oh, it's a very good case and it's in an obscure part of New Zealand, but you know, by and large it looks pretty good. And then we have the former failed MP for Labor, Stuart Nash, up there saying there's no way that Labor will support any water storage irrigation projects. So on one hand, you've sort of got Labor saying, yeah, we support it, but on the other hand, you've got one of their failed ex-list MPs out there saying we don't support it. So I'm very confused whether Labor back rural New Zealand or not. Here we are. We've just come through the worst drought that we've had in 70 years. You would think that Labor would be supporting water storage projects. 400,000 hectares of potential land under irrigation. Labor don't care. Labor don't care about rural communities. And I could run through a list, and I'm going to run through a list in the last moment I've got. They want to introduce a capital gains tax. That'll go down like a cup of sick in rural communities. They're going to lift income tax for the higher threshold as well. That won't go down well. It'll be a higher company tax. They are against any dairy expansion with the far-left greenies involved. They want a wider, more expansive ETS. They want to have a limited water use. They're not going to back the 90-day probation period for new employers. They don't support the rollout of broadband into rural communities. No support for irrigation. They want to stop projects like Transmission Gully, Kapiti Expressway, the list goes on. Of course, they want to unwind any RMA reforms. They aren't interested in returning money through to hard-working taxpayers in terms of our ACC rebates. They're going to rack up more debt. Rural New Zealand doesn't believe anything that the Labor Party or the Greens say. That's why we hold all these seats that we do hold. That's why I'm hugely passionate about primary industries. That's why it is a real focus of mine, the engine room of the New Zealand economy.
I call the honourable member Andrew Little.